Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, where each episode brings you compelling conversations and stories designed to entertain, enlighten, and encourage. And now here's your host, Brian Sexton.
And welcome into the Intentional Encourager podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sexton. Thank you for joining us again today. And man, what a treat I've got here. This guy on LinkedIn, I'm telling you, he is doing some phenomenal things on LinkedIn. And if you're not following Michael David Chapman on LinkedIn, you need to be following Michael David Chapman. He's got some great content, doing a lot of great things. I love his profile. He's the father of four. That's the first thing that you see on his profile. And that'll tell you a little bit about his heart and his compassion and his love for people. And I'm so honored to have him on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Michael David Chapman joins me. Michael, how you doing, man?
Good, Brian. Thanks for having me. How are things? You said West Virginia or Virginia?
No, I'm in West Virginia, man. I'm in the redheaded stepchild state.
Is that what that's known as?
Yeah.
Like the other state?
Yeah. Well, people think we're a part of Virginia. They're like, oh, you're in West Virginia. Are you near Richmond? No, I'm 6 hours from Richmond. I'm 4 hours from Roanoke. So, yeah, I mean, we're doing well here, man. So let me ask you this. So we're recording this in the midst of COVID-19.
Yeah.
How have you been handling the pandemic? Because everybody's doing it different. You're in the Northeast up in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And you guys have been through some hot spots, things like that. So how's everything been for you during the midst of this pandemic?
Well, it's so funny. Like when it first popped off, people were like, how are you doing? I'm like, other than the threat of losing your life, because back when we were struggling.
That's a big threat, dude. That's right? Always big. Yeah.
And I'm not minimizing that. I'm just saying outside of that, I was like, well, there's no change for me. I mean, I've been working from home since almost 3 years now. And I'm an introvert, even though I'm probably don't seem like that in terms of some of the content out there, but in my personal, like with the kids' life, I love my time alone.
Yeah.
So it's not been a big challenge for me. On the professional side, it's COVID hasn't been a positive, but things took off because we work in a digital space. We help entrepreneurs and businesses and really anyone trying to build a business. We help them do that on LinkedIn through organic outreach. We don't use any automation, and then content strategy and boosting services. So it's really been good in that regard. Outside of that, it's been difficult with the kids. My daughter graduated high school with 2 months. COVID hit with 2 months to go, 3 months to go. So that was difficult. That was a weird graduation. That's always tough anyway for a young woman who's going off to school in a single parent home. And then my my oldest son, he works. It really didn't affect him much. He was in essential services. But my two younger boys, it hit them the worst because they're both very social guys. And so me and our son's mother, me and my son's mother, forgive me, it was difficult to get them to stay engaged because it's like, they go from being engaged and lunchtime and recess and whatever they're doing to it's like this, So other than that, that's been difficult.
My son mentioned that too. My son will be 20 on Sunday as we record this podcast. And that's what he said too, Michael. He said, I miss being on campus. He's a sophomore at Marshall University. He misses being on campus. He misses being around other people. And what I don't understand is yes, there's a need to be safe. There's a need to keep people healthy. There's also a need, though, to be around other people and to be social and interact and things like that. And so I totally get it, man, with teenagers and things like that. What kind of encouragement have you been giving your kids around, hey, look, I know this is tough. I know this is different. But what kind of encouragement have you been sharing with your kids around what's going on right now?
Well, I actually talked about it when it first started because that's a great question. And this, I think, will help anyone who's stuck in old expectations. I mean, the encouragement has come, the natural encouragement has flowed from, I should say, right sizing expectations, or in some cases eliminating them, because when it popped off, I mean, it was difficult for a lot of parents. Think about the parents that are not work from home parents. That's like
Yeah.
a lot of people. So I think the first thing that we did as a co-parenting unit was to minimize, to right size expectations, not minimize, but right size them. From there, it's about like, Michael Jr., my middle son, is extremely cool with tech and being on camera and doing that. Whereas my youngest, he's good with tech, but he does not want to engage relationships like that on Zoom or Microsoft Teams. So it was understanding the challenges, some realistic limitations, real or perceived, and then managing my expectations so that I can meet them where they are emotionally. And so it's just, when initially it was complete pushback, we're just not doing school. And so now it's been better. One of the things that we did to encourage my youngest was we have a split schedule. He's here 50-50, but for school, he's at mom's school. Why? Because mom went out and partnered with some other parents, some other moms that are at home, to bring 4 or 5 students every, on certain days to her home to do school. So, I've supported, and this is for single parent, not being hard and fast on the schedule and doing what's best for him, and still, figuring out a way to capture the quality time. So that's been very encouraging for him.
Well, and again, it is keeping as much normalcy as we can, because Michael, we hear it so much, right? We hear we got to get back to normal. We've got to get things back to normal and things like that. And I can never, I'm 48. I can't remember a time in my life when people have said, I can't wait to get it back to normal. Was that something that you and your kid's mom talked about, was keeping it as close to normal as you can? Because there may be some folks out there that are in the same situation you are, with co-parenting kids and things like that. And they're going, man, I'm just trying to keep the balls in the air and keep everything rolling so that my kids don't feel that great disruption. Were those ongoing conversations between you and their mom to say, hey, we've got to be as normal as we can here?
Yeah, I mean, she's been really good with helping me with that, because I'm more linear in that way. So to answer you directly, not so much on the front end, because it's disruptive to my day. It's disrupted to her day. It's just been disruptive. I mean, this has been a huge disruption for everyone, depending with kids, without kids, single, whatever you are. So it's been, again, I'll take you back to, it's been really understanding one another in terms of the communication. I mean, listen, the kids follow the leadership of the parents, whether it's 2 homes or 1 home. I mean, if the leadership's bent, there goes, or if the communication's bent between 2 parents, so goes the leadership, so goes the encouragement, so goes the parenting effectiveness. So we've stayed in really close communications on the challenges, really day to day, to get over that hump. We're over the hump. I mean, now they wake up, they're doing their own thing. There's no gaming going on when there shouldn't be. My youngest is out of bed at 7:30 on his own with alarm. He's 12. He's coming down. He's making breakfast. He's like, Dad, okay, time to take me to mom's school. I mean, it's been effective, but it's been about managing those expectations. I hope I answered your question.
That's really good, because again, I think people are just, Michael, they're just trying to manage it the best they can. They're just, and I use this analogy because down here, we had a lot of guys in this region that I live in West Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky. It's the old farmer licking their finger and kind of seeing which way the wind's blowing. And everybody's trying to navigate. You hear, well, we're navigating this pandemic. We're doing this and we're doing that. I want to flip it just a minute, because, again, I want to talk about what you're doing professionally. When you're hearing from businesses that you're trying to help them grow organically on LinkedIn to grow their business, what are some of the things you're hearing from folks professionally around this pandemic?
Similar, Well, from a marketing perspective, people that were smart, we've seen this with major companies, but on from an entrepreneur perspective, people that were smart with money, that came in, that were approaching this season unbeknownst to them, where everything was going to sort of stop and COVID-19 sort of popped off. People that were smart financially continued to market on social media because they understand intrinsically this is going to have a beginning and an end. So that's been good. But, a lot of what people were talking about was, their own clients pulling back. Everyone pulled back. A lot of people pulled back. And so working with them, assuring them, being flexible in our offering, being flexible with their time, being flexible with, in certain cases, payables has been what everyone sort of have talked about when we've done our weekly calls with our clients. Being flexible.
Well, because again, I think people are trying to understand what they can do to either recapture revenue or hold on to as much revenue as they can. And marketing seems to be the one thing, Michael, that most companies say, okay, when things are good, we're going to continue to market, but when things are bad, that's the first thing that tends to go from a budget is okay, we got to cut marketing dollars.
That's right.
And yeah, and that's the thing is that people don't understand is, man, when things are bad, you double your efforts in marketing because you want to try to attract new customers. You got to keep that pipeline flowing. When you talk to people about organic marketing, what's the first thing that you hear from them as far as that term goes? Because I don't know that a lot of people are keenly aware, even astute business people know what organic marketing is. When you throw that term out there, what's the first thing you hear?
Either I don't know what that means or it doesn't work. So working backwards, it doesn't work to personalize a message, knock on a digital door. It doesn't work to knock on a digital door. Or better yet, let's go back to selling. Cold calling doesn't work. Cold calling is dead. I mean, anytime I've ever heard that.
I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm really glad you brought that up because again, I see so many people that talk about cold calling. And I remember being in sales and loving cold calling because again, I knew that I wanted to meet people. I wanted to interact. I wanted to get them to know me and me to know them because every sale starts with a cold call. I don't care what you sell or what you do. You don't know everybody you're selling to. And so every sales process begins with a cold call. And it's funny, man, that you think about this day and age. You and I are talking over Zoom right now. And we're recording this podcast that way.
Right.
It's funny to me that people are so reticent to cold call, but then they're like, oh yeah, let's jump on a Zoom call. It's the same concept. So how do you get people past those fears of cold calling and things like that? Because again, man, if you think about it linearly and granularly, like we're talking about, it's the same concept.
You got to debunk the myth. You got to, the way that we do it, and I have a shameless plug. I have a 30-day online, 6 to 15 minutes of.
Dude, we're all about shameless plugs here. Plug away. It's totally cool.
It's 6 to 15 minutes of self-guided content every day. Me and another entrepreneur in Australia. Her name is Rana Cordai. She's a sales coach. Co-created this content for people that are non-sales people, like they're engineers, right, or they're coaches or whatever, and they see themselves they're in a traditionally non-sales role, even though they have to sell. So this is what you have to do. You have to debunk the myth that it's something outside of themselves. When it's like, okay, have you ever been on a date? Yes, I have. Okay. Are you married? Yes, I am. When somebody has bought something from you, have you ever bought something in your life? Did you, if you financed a car, did you negotiate the price or did you just take the highest price? I mean, you have to associate with something that for the most part aligns itself with this thought. If your mouth is moving, you're selling something, but not in a traditional sleazy way, right? I mean, it's a mindset shift. So, back to the digital piece, like when I hear people say cold calling is dead, I just like, well, these people don't like people. I mean, they probably have friends, but
That's a
they got
great
all
point, man. Yeah.
they have all the friends they need. If you're saying cold calling is dead in the context of knocking on a door and looking like something out of an 80s B-rated movie or used cars, that movie, remember Used Cars? Did you ever see that movie?
Yeah, Cadillac. Well, the one I saw was Cadillac Man. Remember that one with Robin Williams where he was a used car salesman?
Yeah. Used Cars with Kurt Russell. I mean, come on. Everyone gets that. But for the most part, right now, as you and I engage, you ask me a question, I respond with an idea where I'm either answering that, I'm not responding to not get in. I put it this way. The best way to explain it is I'm responding in an open and honest way, but it is with the intent of answering you and probably having some degree of influence.
Yeah. Well, it's moving interest. It really is about, Michael, it's about moving interest, because you were talking about dating and things like that. If in talking about that concept, there is zero interest, there's mild interest, there's moderate interest, there's heavier interest, there's heavy interest, and there's definite interest. So you move through those stages. And again, I think if we look at it that way, I think, and I've said this before on LinkedIn, I think many salespeople have forgotten how to buy themselves. They work through exactly the same process in their own buying habits. But then when it comes to selling in their professional life, there's like, well, we got to do this, we got to do that. It's all the same thing. So when you're coaching, I'm curious here. I want to just stay here for just a minute. As you're coaching an entrepreneur to think differently, because my 20-year-old son has said, well, Dad, I'm not a salesperson. And I've told him, I said, look, man, you're getting an engineering degree, but you may go to work for a company that may want you to go out on a sales call with somebody to explain to a customer how the design works. So you've got to have some of these same principles in place. So how do you coach an entrepreneur with that mindset of, oh, I don't sell anything, to get them to think organically about starting to sell in that process?
Well, it's reminding them what the end game is. And I'll use this example. After I answer, I use an example of a real life case study. You don't have a business without sales.
Yeah.
When you hear of an acquisition, let's just say an acquisition where the business is built on contract, people are buying the paper. Yeah, they may need the plant, but oftentimes in the industry I worked in the industrial laundry business, I mean, that business is all, when it's bought and sold, it's the paper.
Yeah.
Typically they don't buy the people, and oftentimes they don't buy the plants, the assets. They don't need the trucks. I mean, they have, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. My point there is you don't have a business without sales. So it's important to remind, and the example I want to share is, and we had this client from like end of May until about 3 weeks ago, we scheduled about 300 leads for them. And that was great. And they closed some business, and that was great. But eventually the client discontinued because it wasn't for a lack of leads. And it was leads from like hot stove to ready to be at some point put on the stove. Maybe a little bit better than cold. Interest, but hey, send me an email, something that should go into a follow-up process. I mean, their sales cycle is, 6 weeks maybe to close. And so it's a process where someone interested, yes, email me the information, and then you would say something like, well, okay, Brian, I'm emailing. By the way, just so you know, I'm going to follow up with you in about 8 weeks to, get your information. 8 weeks, could be 3 days, could be 4 hours, whatever it is. They were not a sales organization. Do you know what I mean by, when I say a sales organization, like, what do you mean? Like a bona fide, like, we are here to sell.
Yeah.
We're not here to get leads. So that's interesting about our business. Like, an increase in leads will really expose a successful lead generation effort, outreach campaign will expose issues or deficiencies or opportunities to improve in your sales process. So you got to help people see that.
Well, and Michael, here's the thing too, is that many companies will say, okay, we want to do that. We want to do lead generation and things like that. And then they complain about the leads that come back, or they go, well, this customer doesn't fit what we do, or this, like, wait a minute. This customer is responding in some way positively to what you do, and there is interest there because of who you are and the standing that you have. You've resonated with them. Don't shut that customer out completely, because that may be exactly the customer you're targeting. You think you're trying to target X when Y, when the marketplace is saying, but Y is really what you do.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, or it's, again, there are times when, I mean, if you've got a situation where you got a consistent flow of leads, at least on LinkedIn, that are not a fit, I mean, you've got an issue, and I mean, it's not going to be hard to find that issue. I mean, it's trash in, trash out, right? Yeah. But to your point, what you're talking about is they say that, but it really is a thin veneer sort of hiding or masking issues around successful follow-up. You know, people that really understand why they get a paycheck, why they have, you know, great fringe benefits, why the organization exists is to sell, in this case, the service, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't have people on your team at the front line all the way to the top, where you have people that don't understand the intrinsic reason why the organization exists, you're not going to, it's always going to be what's wrong with this lead. Well, that you're going to have that hemming and hawing instead of, let's figure out a way. Not in every case, you can't be all things to all people, but I'm saying, like, if they're in the family of potential clients, cherry picking what's wrong with a lead, I mean, that's an example of an organization that is not a sales organization.
No, I 100% agree, because again, I think people don't know what they don't know.
Correct.
And again, you may have a product that is the most altruistic of motives, and you go, well, we're not everything. I was having this conversation with my wife this morning. We were talking about college, and I said, don't be mistaken. Higher education is a business. They're just using tax dollars to do it. They're just using federal and state tax dollars to run their business, but it's absolutely a business. It's absolutely about how do we bring more revenue into the university and things like that. And so, yeah, man, it is. And for somebody listening out there that may think to themselves, okay, well, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm really purposeful about what I do. I enjoy what I do. I think I serve people well. There's got to be something else more that takes their business to the next level, because nobody wants to stay where they are. At least, you know, if you're running a business, you should want to grow, right?
Well, again, that's a great question and point that I've been in the sales world long before I did specifically lead generation in the digital space. And, you know, when you turn on the faucet and people are interested, and when you have a well-built profile where, especially if you're in a crowded space, let's say you're a life coach. I mean, that is or just a coach. That is an extremely crowded space.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, because I do coaching as well, people typically gravitate towards relatability. It's skills and certifications and all, but it's going to be relatability, where I'm comfortable, because they're looking for something they can't get in traditional, you know, personal development channels like therapy and other stuff like that. Coaching is totally different. What I'm saying is, when you have a bang up profile that literally separates you from the competition, and you have a very clear avatar, and you have a very clear non-pitchy message, and those leads start coming in, but you have a coach that they don't understand they're in sales first.
Yeah.
They're a coach second in their professional life. Now, they may be a wife, a husband, a father over here. I'm talking about you are a salesman or woman first, because without sales, there is no coaching business.
Yeah. And before we pivot there, I want to park on that for just a minute, because a lot of people may not realize why we do the Intentional Encourager podcast is I have a lot of expertise in sales and sales management and things like that. There are a ton of podcasts that speak to that, and they're great podcasts. You should listen to them. I wanted to do something that told really cool stories of really cool people and some of the things that they've overcome in life and some of the ways that they have risen up to get to where they are in life. and it made them who they are. I love what you said there. You can see an avatar of somebody, and you can see the image that they have professionally and what they ascribe to be. But you don't know all the road that they took to get there.
You don't.
Yeah. And so that's why I wanted to do the Intentional Encourager podcast. Now I want to take a hard left turn. What I love about you. You are so intentional about bringing up uncomfortable things. You're not afraid to tackle uncomfortable topics. And so let's go here for a few minutes.
Yeah.
Take me through your story and go as far as back as you want to go and things like that, because you are very purposeful and intentional about talking about certain things. And that's what I love about you, Michael. So the floor is yours, man. Go ahead. I want you to tell your story.
I don't mind admitting. I mean, I think prior to 40, I had legitimate, but at the same time, excusable daddy issues. I mean, my dad left when I was born. She divorced him when I was 11. He's been an alcoholic his whole life. In my case, when you're typically the typical alcoholic father is one that comes home, is drunk and abuses everybody verbally and physically. And I saw a little bit of that, but for the most part, I had like no attention. I mean, that's attention, right? It's not good attention, but I had like no attention from a male role model. And so, when young men, and this isn't exclusive to young men, but because I am a man, when young men grow up without any attention from a male role model, they sort of figure it out. And so that's my mother was very, very strong. She raised us on the front row of a Baptist church. I mean, and so that definitely kept my brother and I in line to a point. And then there was God. I mean, that was like, then it was like the unintended, or in some cases intended consequences of just nonsense that we found ourselves in. But back to your question. I mean, like I was searching, even though I was a Christ follower my entire life. I mean, I was saved when I was 12. I really didn't understand. That was more of like fire insurance. I mean, I felt, okay, I'm a bad guy. There's this bad place I'm going to. Okay, this gets me in here. It really wasn't relationship. I wasn't discipled.
I got to tell you, I got to jump in here. Your childhood and my childhood sound really similar.
Very common. Yeah.
Because Baptist kids and Pentecostal kids always had the fire and brimstone drop down on them from their parents. Like, God help you if you misbehave in church.
Yeah.
God help you if you did something. Because that's the way I grew up, man. My aunt was my Sunday school teacher. And I remember my dad lighting me up like a Christmas tree because my aunt called and said he was a hellion in Sunday school today. And it was like fire. So you're talking about that. And I'm like, that's my childhood. That's
yeah. It's kind of like this. I've always joked. It's like, it's just terrible. Like, and I mean, I sat on the front row. I mean, from 1980 to until really the split of that church, the front row of Charles Stanley's church. Right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And, Andy was my youth pastor. I still listen to North Point every week. So I always say this, so this isn't for anybody that's, Baptist out there takes offense, but it felt like I was saved every Sunday and I was like going to hell on Monday. It's the truth, man. I mean, it's just the way it was. I mean, like,
are you sure that wasn't Baptist-costal? I mean, really, are you sure it wasn't Baptist-costal?
And that's some of the best, at least in those years, and still the best Bible teaching you can find. So I hold to that. But that absence of a male role model turned into, it was this pursuit to get affirmation, get attention, whatever, turned into adult life, into professional, to married life. I've been married twice. I'm a single father now. It turned into an excuse for everything. I never remember saying, well, because I don't have a father, it's okay for me. Because I didn't have a father, it's okay for me to be in a rage. I never said that, but I behaved that way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because my dad left, it's okay for me to not have integrity on this issue at work. I mean, but can I draw a line between that reality or that bad decision back to lack in that relationship, lack in fathering? Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's fair to a point. It's not fair. And what I realized, later was that I was making subconscious excuses because and I didn't learn this later, and now I help men do it. I never learned to grieve that loss. You're like, well, what do you mean loss? Like he actually is still alive. But I lost a dad that I never had. That's still a loss because, when you think about the family, I mean, we're supposed to have a dad, we're supposed to have a mom, we're supposed to have two parents. I mean, all the statistics support that kids are better off with two in the home. We're not even going to go there. The data is in. I think, in fact, it's probably the number one thing we're facing in this country, regardless of minority status or whatever, is the absent father and the irresponsible, our culture that says it's okay for dads to forsake the responsibilities at home. That being said, I was just walking around this wounded guy that really needed to learn to grieve the loss of somebody that I never knew. And so I did that during my second separation and second divorce. I learned to grieve the loss of a relationship that I never even had, because I was able to learn that grieving process and finally being able to say, wow, I've been behaving out of this trauma of loss. I mean, he was abusive at times, but really he was gone more than he was there. So I did see some abuse and some yelling, but it was the absence. It's hearing nothing. Mm-hmm. It's not getting anything from a part of the world that needs to, from a man that feeds a man teaching a man how to be a man.
Yeah.
I had to grieve that.
I got to ask you this. What would people because we've seen Dr. Stanley and we've seen Andy Stanley from a distance, now First Baptist Atlanta, their services have been broadcast nationwide for probably 20, 25 years.
Yeah.
But growing up in that church, what do people not know about Dr. Charles Stanley and Andy Stanley that they would be like, oh man, that's kind of cool. That's pretty cool that these guys are actually, because you read different things and you see different things. And of course, Dr. Stanley went through a personal situation a few years ago in his own life. What is something about the Stanleys that people would be like, man, that's neat to know that maybe is not there in the forefront?
Well, I want to be fair and clear. Like, when back in those, so I never knew Dr. Stanley personally. I was a little guy. I'm sure that he probably remembers my mother and would probably remember my brother and I, because my mother had us on the front row of that church for years. Okay. Andy, on the other hand, would definitely remember my name and face. And I didn't engage when he was a youth pastor. It was still so big, dude. Even though I could have walked up to Andy and say, Andy, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? Like, he was completely approachable. It was still big. And I was a young kid and, smoking cigarettes, as a young kid, I was doing stupid stuff. And so I would have been afraid to go up to the pastor.
Are you sure you weren't a West Virginia Baptist? That's what some Free Will Baptists in West, dude, I got to tell you this real quick. And I don't mean to jump in, but we're just having a great conversation. I grew up in a Pentecostal church. Okay. Yeah. Hair, when I grew up, my mom had a hairdo, like the Marge Simpson beehive hairdo. Skirts to the floor. When we would shout in service, bobby pins would be flying like machine guns. I mean, that's the church that I grew up in. And so I was in college and I dated this girl that was Free Will Baptist. And I went to church with her, and it was a little country Baptist church. And the first time I ever saw a preacher preaching with a pack of smokes in his pocket was in that church. Are you sure, man? That's why I ask you. Are you sure you didn't grow up in rural West Virginia?
No, I never saw Stanleys with smokes, just to be clear. But I mean,
this sermon brought to you by Marlboro.
Yeah. The church was in downtown Atlanta, and I was a skater kid. So, I'd conveniently have my skateboard in the back seat or in the trunk of our car. And during Sunday school, I mean, I'd go get my board and when my mom thought I was in Sunday school, I'd be up at, there's a song they did. The band was called Good. Anybody who goes by First Baptist Church Atlanta knows this. There's the Wednesday night thing was called Good Stuff. How cool was that? It was the Good Stuff band, and they had this song. You remember Smoking in the Boys' Room?
Yeah.
On Motley Crue, they had Smoking at Wendy's or Getting Out to Wendy's or something. They did this spoof song. I was like, that was totally me. I was like, how do they know? It was totally so funny. But back to your question. Let's make that a huge preface to answer your question.
No, that's good, man.
I mean, listen, they went through I don't know all the details. I was a young guy. I was just graduating high school. But this is what I would say about the Stanleys from 50,000 feet. What appeared to be the breakup of that church because of what went on. I think those two men and the women in those two men's lives, from what I saw, were an example of how to be a family when something doesn't work. I can say a lot of things about Andy Stanley. Andy Stanley, when I was going through my second divorce, I was plugged into every bit of content I could get from him. And he was one of 3 or 4 pastors that I listened to when there was nobody or nothing stuck here in New Hampshire. So I could say a lot about it, but I can't speak a lot about him personally, other than that's a good one. Like, I just remember, him talk about the differences in some of his sermons, and then see, from a distance that that's still a family that loves one another, and maybe everybody didn't agree, but, in the world of religion, right? Usually, you don't agree with me and I don't agree with you. That's boom, you're done. You're a pariah, you're out. I didn't see any of that behavior going on in that family. And again, I wasn't very close. I'm like 55 degrees of separation. I want to be clear for anybody. He was my youth pastor for a time, and he was my pastor for a time. And now, Andy's a guy I listen to every week.
Yeah, you lose touch with people. Yeah, you lose touch with people, and it happens. You lose touch with that's one part of your life that's gone, and things like that. And that's the thing too, is just because you serve the Lord does not insulate you from divorce, doesn't insulate you from problems. It doesn't insulate you from anything, man. It doesn't. I want to be clear about that, because people will say, oh, you Christians are just, you guys are just, you Jesus followers, man. It's all sunshine and roses. We're here to tell you it's not. Nowhere close to being that.
Well, some of that's because of how it's sometimes, it's painted, right? Yeah. You've seen this, and I think anybody that's a Christ follower understands this. You get a little victory in something in your life, and Brian's not doing it. Like, man, I'm I've let go of that thing, and I'm starting to be nicer, and I'm gonna start telling Brian how I did it and what he needs to do. And all of a sudden, they got a preacher on Sunday morning, but now they've got me in this relation. You've got me in this hypothetical. Now you get in the side, Brian, you need to do. Oftentimes I think what happens with that one is where believers slide easily, and it happens to all of us, from chasing the relationship to chasing the rules, or being more interested in the formula than the heart. And listen, I've done that. I did that in my second marriage. We're both believers. She was a pastor's kid, and we lived, I'll speak for me. I lived that without even knowing I was doing it for a long time.
Well, it becomes process over product.
Yeah.
It
process
becomes
over people. That's
yeah,
right.
or process over people. Yeah, because you think, okay, if I don't do this, and this, the product is not going to be this.
Right.
And it's like, well, wait a minute. It's not really about the process. It's more about, getting yourself. Listen, there are days that I totally fail. I totally fail God. And I'm being completely transparent.
Mm-hmm.
The beautiful thing is, like parents, our kids could totally fail, totally screw up. They come to us, they look us in the eye, and they go, Dad, my son, we have one. My son could come to me and say, Dad, you know what? He could look me in the eye and say, you know what? I screwed up.
Right.
And you know what? I'd look at him, I'd give him a hug and say, so all's forgiven. That's the Lord. you know, you come to him with a repentant heart and you say, listen, God, I messed up today. And he goes, guess what? All is forgiven. And every day we wake up, it's another day. Something I want to go here with you, Michael, because and again, I mentioned a few minutes ago how intentional you are. A subject that you broach quite a bit is mental health.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about that, what was the prompting inside of you to start really being forward about that? Because you're forward in a subject that most people want to be reticent in. What was it that caused you to go forward with talking about those things?
Three key data points or markers in my life. In 2006, my then in-laws were going through, might have been 06, 07. They were going through a divorce. And I remember hearing my then mother-in-law say about her then husband, I think so-and-so has been depressed his whole life. And I'll never forget, like, you know, we were in the middle of discussion talking about whatever, and that stuck with me. And I'm like, and so that would have been, 14 years ago? I was in my early 30s. I remember thinking, I think that's me, and then doing nothing about it. The next marker was going through the second divorce and recognizing for the first time that really started at 40. I think I've been depressed my whole life because the root issues of unresolved hurt, trauma, pain, abuse, physical, mental, other ways, that has just been sitting there that I have not grieved with my Father in heaven. And then the third was when I put that into action. I put together a series that I did about a year and a half ago. It's a 9-part series on men in depression. Again, for everyone listening, I'm not a therapist. You know, I don't talk about medication for it or against it, although my entire journey was anti-med. And there was a lot of ignorance on my part there. I think my kids would have benefited. I know I would have benefited, and my kids would have benefited on certain parts of during the second divorce, because it was traumatic. I mean, it rocked me. But that 9-part series that I did on men and depression, it's on my profile, was me coming out, if I can say that, and say it's about 4 to 5 minutes and saying, look, this was my journey and this is my understanding of it, where I really break down what I learned about it and what was at the root of it from the inside out, around the ignorance, the shame, the guilt, the denial. I really unpack that. And I go on to talk about how it showed up in my kids' life. How my fear of saying, I need help, my fear of saying, really, I'm not right, I'm not healthy, started to show up in hurtful ways for my kids.
What was the greatest lesson that you learned through that time of discovering what you were going through and how you were going through it? Because it would be real easy to do that privately. Yeah. It would be real easy to do that quietly. But what was the greatest lesson that came from that you now will take publicly from what you went through?
Really two. The one of them was, and it's kind of it seems like it might be the antithesis of what I'm saying, or the opposite. When you grow up with an emotional deficit, okay, and I think that is the entire world on some level. I mean, even people that had great relationships with their parents, everybody goes through a hurt and pain, and they have a hurt and a deficit, whatever. But I'm talking about for people that, like, from day one or most of their childhood, they had one or both parents that were bad or weren't there, or in my case, I just had silence from a male role model, whatever. I mean, one of the things that's hard to do is to be alone, right? And so to be alone and not be lonely, to be alone, to say lonely, being alone and being lonely are two different things. It's really a skill that I believe every human being, prior to like age 10 needs to learn. And so I couldn't do it. And so I went down all of the paths throughout my life to be alone and get attention and do all kinds of things. So when you lose something, that you feel like you don't want to lose or you shouldn't lose in a relationship, and it's not the first time, then you're faced to look at yourself. And in my case, one of the things I learned during that time was the value of being alone, specifically with the Lord, right? The value to be alone and not be lonely. So that's number one. The second one was to be able to say that as much as I thought I knew about forgiveness and everything we read from social media to the word, doesn't matter, okay? There's always, or there could always be a new level of releasing people or yourself of debts, which is what it is. And so there was a part in 2018. There was a real breakthrough moment in February of 18 where there was a new level of forgiveness. Where I had this conversation with God. I was like, well, I have let it go. And he's like, no, you haven't. You're still looking to have something that was wronged, some way you were wronged, and it was a big wrong. You're looking to still be justified. You're looking to have that person's face rubbed in, name it, you name it, which was the truth. And I'll never forget, man. And this was my son's mother. I'll never forget. By that point, her and I probably, you talked to her more than I did by that point. I mean, we used to talk. I mean, it was like, trying to co-parent two kids from 10 minutes away, and we don't talk. And I'll never forget, just calling her in complete tears and say, look, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to let everything go. And I'm not living like this anymore. And this sounds very generic, but that was for any single parent out there, if someone's going through that, it's very difficult to submit to that when you're in the right. I mean, you line up 1,000 people, they'd all agree you're in the right, and you're owed something, and you're owed the money, or you're owed the apology, or whatever it is. And then to hear a very quiet voice that for people that are not believers, what do you mean hearing from God? That's insane. Did you hear? I said, no, it was just this understanding of trying to God, why am I so miserable on the inside? And it was you're still holding debts that are not yours to hold. And it took about a year, but now we're at a point where we talk daily and we can co-parent, and I just can't even remember that dude, man. I remember what I did and did wrong. And I remember, I can remember, but I don't remember a lot of the things that she said. I don't remember. Somebody the other day, this is off topic, but somebody the other day was, I challenged the notion that something like, your words may be forgiven, but they won't be forgotten. I was like, nah, I think that's garbage.
Yeah.
And I started to say that person doesn't know Christ.
Yeah.
Which is that thing we said earlier where, so you can judge me. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the truth of the matter is I understand what that means at the root of it. Intrinsically, I get it. If I start losing my mind on this podcast, start cussing and doing F words, it's gonna be a long time before you forget it. The question is, do you want to remember that? I understand, I'm kind of going into a little rabbit hole of what forgiveness versus, but what I want to say is I don't remember a lot of the things she said to me, hurtful things she said to me. It's not that I've clicked it off, but it's I've intentionally said, no, I do want forgiveness to be forgetting. That's different than trusting. That's different than saying, well, Brian's a thief, he stole from us, but I don't remember. So, I naively have this friendship with you. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is when I have listened to someone's case for forgiving is not forgetting, especially around words, typically there's still a little crumb or two of unforgiveness. Always. I shouldn't say always, most of the time. If you listen long enough, they'll go down the path of what they did, and they're still in the story. And before long, you're is this debt been forgiven, released, or what? What's going on? I say that just to encourage people, and this is the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Yes, it is.
That part of forgiveness, and the thing that I learned is to say, Lord, help me not forget, not magically, but if it's, put it this way, if it's a sharp edge, I never wanted to be married to you. I was married to you for 10 years and I never wanted to be married to you. I mean, that would hurt anybody. What you're looking for forgetting is to have it dulled.
Yeah.
Because the sharper it is, the harder it is to let go. The harder it is, I mean, the more they owe you, the more the words, the sorry that's never coming, and off we go. So I learned that forgiving and forgetting do hold hands.
Well, and it is, I'm thinking, before I ask you the last question I had, I'm thinking about the parable when Jesus talked about the man who owed a debt. It was forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes, someone owes him money, and he goes and basically does a mafia shakedown.
He jacks him up.
Yeah, it's like, you're going to pay me what you owe me. And the man who had, this guy owed more money to the other guy, and the other guy who forgave the debt said, listen, you owed me way more than that guy owed you, but I showed you forgiveness. I showed you mercy. You should have gone and done likewise. So now it's going to be harder on you because you didn't do the right. That when you were talking about that, Michael, that's what that in my mind, because, we are such I'm going to file that away and I'm going to remember that so that I can weaponize it against you at some point.
Yeah. Like, again, to separate those two, it's all about the heart. I mean, the leaders lead from the heart. What is the intention of the heart? It's if you're saying forgetting, forgiving is not forgetting. If it's for the purposes of protection, you've genuinely released a person of debt, you just need to, you remember it because, you have a tendency of trusting people too much or something like that. It's great. But for the most part, who wants to remember being abused? Who wants to remember, especially if somebody at one point the relationship was good and then it went sour because of drugs or alcohol, some stupid thing somebody did. Who wants to remember that? I don't need to remember that to understand that Brian's trustworthy or not. Right. And so the question on the flip side, I'm going to hold on to that because Brian did this to me and but you're forgiven. That's not the way it works.
Man, Brian's a jerk,
That's not the way it works. Yeah, it's probably controversial. I mean, I don't know what your listenership is like, but people are like, what is this guy talking about? I'm just saying, like, only you and your creator know your heart. And if the goal is to genuinely forgive, then part of me is going to say, like, help me not. I want to see the best. I mean, especially in a co-parenting situation, I need to see her in the best light possible. I'm still called to honor her.
Yeah.
End of discussion. And when I understood that meant like, well, I don't remember a lot of this stuff. I just don't. I mean, it's because I just don't think about it, and it's gotten further and further away. If I sat here and tell me everything she did wrong, I'd get there, I guess. But
well, yeah, I mean, because again, the mind, a lot of times we hold on to things in our lives that people have done that we should have released long ago. And the person that did us wrong, they're skipping along through life, and we're just like, but I'm still holding on to this. Obviously, they've forgotten it, so why don't we?
Well,
so yeah.
Then it's not forgiveness. But again, it's not for us to. I mean, it's not for us to make a judgment until we have the facts. So.
That's right. That's right. Hey, I got to ask you this before we get out of here. Leave the folks with your biggest piece of intentional encouragement. I ask everybody on every podcast, what's your biggest piece of intentional encouragement, Michael?
It's more of a piece of, if you're, again, I've watched the news, I have some friends or whatever, but I've been like, I wasn't part of a large group of people that, when this thing hit and companies were in bad positions, they just pulled back, and I remember watching the story of Marriott, and I don't know where they are now, but like all those people that like all of a sudden, man, I was a platinum member for a year. I mean, like all those housekeeping people and front desk people and general managers and whatnot, that just boom, there's no place to work. They're not sitting. I mean, they're a commodity. They're needed everywhere. If you found yourself in a position where you took, you're still taking the financial hits from the pandemic, the one thing I would say more than anything that we need outside of provision, money to feed our families and all those things, that is unique every day. Okay. And need to ask for those things wherever you're at. Do you pray? Whatever that is. But the one thing I would encourage people to ask for and learn to do now more than ever, and I always say this, it's like, what is your one piece of advice? It's to learn to lead your heart. I mean, and that comes from my playbook of failure. I mean, like I followed it. And so learn to lead your heart really comes from what Solomon talked about. And, in my take and my paraphrasing of that is, everything that we do is coming from the inside. It's coming from what's going on the inside. Even if we've closed the distance between the heart and the mind, logical and the feelings and whatever, it's always coming from the inside. So if the inside is bent with guilt, greed, anger, lust, I should have what Brian should have, envy, jealousy, all these things that's difficult to see, then the leadership follows that, right? And I say that, you're like, what does that have to do with me getting a new job? Well, that's a great point. I mean, if you've now getting some job opportunities, and again, you're not seeing these opportunities for what they are, you might not make the right decision for what's right for your family, for your life, for your professional life. So the difference between follow your heart and lead your heart typically is objectivity, is wisdom, the ability to have a listening heart. And I'll end with a short story. The last job, the job that moved us from Atlanta, Georgia, I lost my job in 2012. And by the end of that year, I had 6 opportunities. 2 of them would have kept us in Atlanta. And that marriage, the marriage I was in no condition to do a fourth move in under 6 years. Okay. And the economy was pretty good, 2012, we were coming back, and, I didn't struggle with getting opportunities, but I didn't have anyone in my life by my own choosing, other than my wife at the time, anyone in my life that could help me develop and continue to develop and season a listening heart. So we made a decision together. Instead of what I really needed was a Brian Sexton or somebody to say, hey, tell me about the condition of your marriage. How often do you date your wife? Why are you really moving to New Hampshire? Oh, it's a tax-free state. It's the best deal on paper. And again, we've got people listening like, Michael, I have no deals. I get all that, but still, that's an example from my own life of the need to have a listening heart so you can lead it versus follow it.
Man, that is so cool. What a great conversation we've had, man. And I told you before, I said, we'll go about 35, 40 minutes. We've gone an hour.
Thank God my next guy was like, let's punt our call.
Yeah.
So we could continue to go. My 3:00 cancel. That's fine.
Well, yeah, but this is a great place for us to stop because, again, you've given us a ton of wisdom right there.
Thanks.
In that. Go connect with him on LinkedIn at Michael David Chapman, and tell folks where else they can connect with you as well.
Just
Michael.
there.
Just there. Yeah, there you go, man. Hey, this has been a blast. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining me on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Take care.
My thanks as always to producer Bryce Sexton and technical advisor Matt Means. And the ultimate thanks goes to the Lord Jesus Christ, who provides intentional encouragement every day through his word. And until next time, remember, everyone, everywhere, at any time, and any place can be an intentional